They threw my stepsister a surprise dinner and forgot to tell me. I found out because someone posted a photo, my father smiling at the head of the table, my mother raising a glass, my stepsister pretending to cry over a cake with candles shaped like gold crowns. In the corner of the picture sat the gift I had mailed early, wrapped in ivory paper, my handwriting still visible on the card, with love. I remember staring at that image until my phone screen dimmed. No one had called. No one had apologized. I was invited only as decoration. Through a present they let sit on the table, so my absence looked voluntary. That was the part that burned. I heard the old betrayal in it. The one buried under years of polite exclusions, forgotten birthdays, edited family photos. This wasn't a mistake. It was choreography. So I said nothing. 3 weeks later, my grandmother called. Her voice was thin, urgent. "Come over. Alone. Don't tell your father." The room around me went still. When I arrived, her curtains were drawn. A metal lock clicked behind me. She slid a worn envelope across the kitchen table, her hands trembling. "I kept this because I knew one day you'd need it." Inside were bank records, letters, and a copy of my late grandfather's revised will. And in the margin, in his own handwriting, one sentence changed everything. "To my eldest grandchild, who was deliberately excluded, I leave what was hidden." That was the moment I realized the dinner wasn't the betrayal. It was the mistake that exposed one. I grew up in a family where silence was treated as obedience, and obedience was mistaken for love. My father admired appearances more than truth, and my stepmother mastered the art of making cruelty look like etiquette. Nothing dramatic enough to be called abuse, just 1,000 quiet exclusions. My stepsister got celebration. I got obligation. She received surprise dinners. I was asked to help set the table. I learned early that being easy to overlook made people careless around you. They spoke freely in front of me, assuming I noticed nothing. Money conversations, property arguments, family decisions made without my name included. If I objected, I was too sensitive. If I withdrew, I was distant. I was always assigned the flaw. My grandmother was the exception. She watched without interrupting, the way old people sometimes do when they know time reveals what confrontation cannot. When my grandfather died, she squeezed my hand at the funeral and whispered, "Some truths arrive late." I didn't understand then. Years passed, and I became the dependable one. The one who sent gifts, remembered anniversaries, answered calls, even after being forgotten. They mistook restraint for weakness. That was their habit. What they never understood was this. People who survive on observation often know where every fracture in a family is buried. And once I saw the pattern, I stopped trying to be included. I started remembering everything. After my grandmother showed me the envelope, I didn't confront anyone. I watched. That made every insult sharper. At the next family gathering, my father introduced my stepsister to guests as the one keeping the family together, then glanced at me and added, almost as an afterthought, "And this one lives in their own world." People laughed softly, the polite kind of laugh meant to wound without looking cruel. I smiled as if I hadn't heard it. My stepmother had her own methods. She would pause before handing out invitations, pretend confusion, then say, "Oh, I thought you were busy." Her tone was sugar over steel. At dinner, she'd place old family stories on the table like inheritance, always editing me out. Even my stepsister joined in casually. She wore the bracelet I had once given our grandmother and said, she wanted me to have what means the most. She watched my face while saying it. I gave her nothing, but I noticed things. The way my father went quiet whenever estate paperwork was mentioned. The way my stepmother changed the subject when my grandmother's health came up. The way glances passed between them when they thought I was distracted. Small betrayals began aligning into pattern. Then came the final insult. My stepsister mailed formal engagement announcements to distant relatives. Mine arrived unsealed. Inside, someone had crossed out "beloved family" and written in pen, "Guest." That night I placed my grandfather's will beside the card and understood they weren't mocking me. They were testing whether I knew what they had tried to hide. I decided enough was enough the day my father came to my grandmother's house. While I was there, he didn't know I was in the next room. I heard his shoes stop at the kitchen tile, heard the long pause before he spoke in that careful voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "She's getting old," he said. "Those documents confuse her. It would be better if the papers stayed with family." "With family," my grandmother answered quietly, but every word landed. "You mean with you?" Silence. Then I heard drawers opening, paper moving, the sound of someone searching where they had no right to search. That was the moment something hardened in me. Not because of greed, because I finally saw the truth stripped of manners. They were not merely excluding me socially, they were preparing to erase me legally. I stepped into the kitchen holding the envelope. My father froze. No shouting, no accusation. I only asked, looking for this. His face changed for half a second. Too quick for anyone who wasn't paying attention. Fear. That expression told me more than any confession could. That night, I met privately with my grandmother's attorney, the one named in my grandfather's papers. We reviewed every document, every transfer, every irregular signature. Some assets had been moved in ways that raised questions. The turning point wasn't revenge. It was choosing evidence over emotion. I stopped reacting like a wounded child and started acting like a witness. And once the attorney said, "You have grounds to challenge all of this," I understood something irreversible. They had spent years counting on my silence. They had mistaken silence for surrender. I made no dramatic moves. I became methodical. The attorney advised one rule first: document everything, reveal nothing. So I did. I gathered copies of the revised will, property records, bank transfers, old emails, holiday messages, even photographs that established timelines. I requested public records quietly and had the attorney compare signatures against older estate documents. A forensic accountant he trusted reviewed suspicious transfers connected to accounts my father had controlled after my grandfather's death. Patterns emerged. Funds meant for shared beneficiaries had been redirected. Household assets had been undervalued. Certain disclosures appeared intentionally delayed. I said nothing to my family. Instead, I accepted every invitation. I attended my stepsister's engagement events, brought gifts, smiled in photographs, listened when people spoke too freely. My stepmother, believing I was back in my usual role, began boasting to relatives about how everything was already settled. Several heard it. Witnesses matter. My grandmother, sharper than they assumed, updated her medical competency declaration with her physician and signed a recorded statement affirming her intentions regarding the estate. The attorney stored everything. Then I used my father's greatest weakness, reputation. He sat on a local charity board and cultivated an image of integrity. Any probate, dispute alleging concealment, would invite scrutiny he could not control. The plan was simple: no ambush, no threats. Wait until the engagement dinner where extended family, business associates, and the family attorney would all be present. Then trigger formal notice. Not humiliation, exposure through process. Because private cruelty survives in shadows. Paperwork, properly timed, does not. The engagement dinner was exactly as they planned it. Warm lighting, expensive food, soft laughter bouncing off glass and porcelain. My stepsister wore confidence like jewelry. My father moved through the room like everything still belonged to him. No one noticed how often he checked his phone, until the door opened. The family attorney arrived first, calm, professional, carrying a folder that looked far too ordinary to matter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply asked for a few minutes of attention. The room shifted in stages: confusion, irritation, then stillness as documents were placed on the table. Copies of transfers, signatures, timeline comparisons. A recorded statement from my grandmother. A formal notice of estate review. My father tried to speak, but the attorney continued anyway, outlining inconsistencies with the quiet precision of someone who has no emotional stake in the outcome. I watched my family's faces change in real time. Not chaos, not shouting, just the slow collapse of certainty. My stepsister's smile faded when she realized guests were reading the papers over her shoulder. My stepmother reached for explanations that no longer landed anywhere, and then my grandmother's voice, recorded, filled the silence. Steady, unmistakable. I intended my inheritance to be honored, not redirected. That was the moment the room understood this was no misunderstanding. It was already recorded. I didn't speak once. I didn't need to. When I finally stood to leave, no one stopped me. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten one at the edge of the picture. I was the reason the picture broke. After that night, nothing exploded, but everything changed shape. My father stopped attending the same events. His messages became short, careful, stripped of certainty. The board he served on requested a review of conduct, framed politely, but everyone understood what that meant. Reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It erodes through questions people stop ignoring. My stepmother shifted into damage control. She tried calling relatives before they could misinterpret anything, but the word had already spread in quieter ways. Through lawyers, through documents, through people who suddenly remembered details they had once dismissed. Trust, once questioned, rarely returns in full. My stepsister didn't speak to me. Not in anger, more like avoidance. The kind that comes when someone realizes they were standing in the center of a story they didn't control. Her engagement continued, but the energy around it dulled, as if everyone had learned to smile more carefully. And me? I didn't feel victorious. I felt unshaken. The stakes were never just money or inheritance. They were identity, recognition, the right to exist in a family without being edited out. What people watching this kind of story often understand too late is this. Exclusion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's polite. Sometimes it's wrapped in celebration. But it still leaves evidence. And once that evidence is seen, no one can unsee it. Not even the people who created it. In the weeks that followed, I stopped waiting for an apology that would never arrive in the form I once imagined. That realization didn't come as relief or anger. It came as clarity. For years, I had measured my place in the family by proximity. Invitations, mentions, inclusion in photographs. I now understood those were never indicators of value. They were reflections of control, who was allowed to be seen, and who was kept just out of frame. Met with the attorney once more to close the immediate proceedings. Nothing more needed to be said. The documents spoke clearly enough, and the process would continue on its own path without my constant involvement. Slowly, my life became quieter in a different way. Not the silence of exclusion, but the silence of choice. I rebuilt routines without waiting for acknowledgement. I answered fewer calls, explained nothing, and felt no obligation to translate my absence anymore. My grandmother visited one afternoon and sat beside me without speaking for a long time. Before leaving, she simply said, "You didn't become harsh. You became clear." That stayed with me. The future didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like distance from a version of myself that kept asking to be chosen. And for the first time, I understood. Being forgotten was never the ending they thought it was. It was the moment I finally stopped living like I needed to be remembered to exist.